Do you have evidence for evolution? If so, join the stream and share your evidence. I'm doing this because I believe evolution is false and a lot of people have been indoctrinated. And I want to show people the truth that there is not overwhelming evidence for evolution. And so I have not seen good evidence for evolution. And if you have some, then please join the stream and share your evidence. Anyone is welcome. And as long as you're being respectful, I would love to hear your evidence. If you bring good evidence, I will write it down. I'll look into it. And if it is good evidence, then I will be honest about the data. I will, from now on, list that as good evidence for evolution. So please bring your evidence. And until someone joins and brings evidence, I will share some things against evolution. Now, if you want to join the stream, there's a link at the top where at the top of the chat, you can join at that link. The link is also in the description of the video, so feel free to join there as well. And let's see, I'm going to bring this up. I want to show this evidence against evolution. Now, this is really more against the evolutionary timeline. So the evolutionary timeline says that life started developing billions of years ago, and then there's a whole timeline associated with the fossil record. And so that timeline includes dinosaurs living millions of years ago, dying off 65 million years ago. Now, in the last 20 years, it has really come to light that dinosaur fossils often contain collagen and remains of structures like blood vessels and osteocytes. And this should not be if these fossils are really 65 to 100 million years old. We should not find these remains of this soft tissue. Now, there are hypotheses for how this could have lasted, but when Mary Schweitzer started producing and publishing papers about the soft tissue in dinosaurs, the scientific community completely rejected it. They said it has to be contamination. Why? Because we know that soft tissue does not stick around that long. There is no scientific explanation for how blood vessels and collagen stick around in a dinosaur fossil for that long. So finally, the results have been reproduced so many times by Mary Schweitzer and many others now. There's been over 100 scientific papers published showing not only in dinosaur fossils, but in fossils at even older layers, according to the evolutionary timeline, that also have soft tissue in them. And so this is one very good piece of evidence that the evolutionary timeline is just wrong. And, these fossils are actually much younger. Now, I'm not saying the evolutionary community, they could possibly come up with something, but right now there is currently no scientific explanation for how these soft tissues could have stuck around that long. And there's been tests done. Now they've found some things that could possibly extend the time a bit by cross-linking different chemicals that could help cross-link the peptide bonds and keep those structures intact a little bit longer. But so far, no one is saying that they have an answer for how this could have happened with fossils that are 65 million years old. So that's what I'm going to be sharing tonight on my weekly debate with my brother. And if anybody wants to join us for that, we'll see what his response is to why dinosaur fossils still have blood vessels and soft tissue. A lot of people aren't even aware of that. They're not even aware that this has been reproduced. It's quite well known. And so now it's been completely accepted by the scientific community that, hey, these, structures are there, collagen is there. And so that's something we don't have an explanation for. So far, nobody has joined to share any evidence for evolution. So I'm just going to give you some reasons to know that evolution is false. And so here's 4 reasons to reject evolution. The proposed mechanisms for evolution are grossly insufficient for producing life and the diversity of life that we see on Earth today. One of the proposed mechanisms, the only one that could possibly bring about new genes, is mutation. But the problem with mutations is that we have seen our scientific observations show that mutations degrade genetic material. They do not, in general, enhance. Now, you might be able to pick out 1 or 2 examples where a point mutation or something allowed an organism to exist in a slightly different way. But when we're talking about mutations building organisms, we're talking about mutations that would have had to be thousands of mutations that were coordinated in such a way to produce a new system or a new feature in an organism. So that is something that we do not observe mutations doing. The next reason to reject evolution is that throughout life, even to the simplest cell, there are numerous chicken and egg problems. And what I mean by that is you have to have both things in place. Just like if you're going to have the next generations of chickens, you have to have an egg and you have to have a chicken. So the chicken and the egg problem, they both have to be in place at the same time. You have to have both. And you also have to have a rooster. But with regard to different mechanisms within our cells, so many things have to be in place all at once. And so for the simplest of cells to work at all, to function at all, there have to be systems that are interdependent on each other. And they don't have time to evolve over millions of years. You have to have them in place. And time is not your friend with that either, because even just when we're talking about life and organic compounds, they don't just hang out and form themselves together in ways that work to make a function. They don't do that naturally. So these are things that require foresight, intelligence, a coordination. And that's the 4th reason to reject evolution, is that what we see in life, even down to the simplest living organism, we see an integrated system. We see integrated systems throughout life, throughout plants, throughout animals, throughout microorganisms. We see integrated systems, and those do not come about by chance, by natural processes. They require foresight. There has to be someone who is thinking out what has to go into this system to make it work and put everything in place. So those are the reasons to reject evolution. And now we have some comments. So let me see what people are saying. And Howard says, why is there not a single example of dinosaur bones with modern animals such as bears, cats, horses, dogs, antelope, cattle, and rabbits? Actually, there are lots of dinosaur bones that are found with mammals and other organisms. So this just flat out isn't true. Now, what is true is that when you go to museums, they don't put those animals with the dinosaurs. They're trying to paint a picture of what life was like. But actually, there are lots of modern mammals that were alive at the same time as the dinosaurs. So the picture of like the dinosaurs ruling and there were no other animals, that is completely false. It's also false when people say and present as if modern plants were not there at the time of dinosaurs. We find modern plants at the same levels that we find the dinosaurs at. So this is just a completely false comment. And maybe I can do a stream talking about this one time. If people don't believe me, then I'll have to gather up some information on that and present it to you. And I'd be happy to do that, Howard. Um, oh, and actually, the other thing I want to say about this comment as well is that did you know that a lot of the fossils that we find in the deeper layers, even though they like exactly correspond to a modern animal, they are named as a different genus and a different species, even though the fossil looks exactly the same as a modern animal. So part of this is a naming problem too, because it's assumed that these are different animals because of where they're found in the fossil layer. So that's another either outright deception or a I have no other explanation except that, you know, they're not doing their homework when they name these as completely different organisms. Now, he says, ban religion and you will understand. Well, I don't know what that has to do with what I'm doing right now, but I will say that evolution is proclaiming to be science, but it is much more like a religion because it requires belief. It actually demands belief. And try going around in, you know, an academic circle and just saying that you don't believe in evolution and see how fast you get ostracized. Okay, it demands your belief, and it demands a lot more than that. Okay, but anyway, I don't want to go too far off track with this evolution as a religion thing, but because I'm really wanting to talk about the science. Howard says there are mammals, but not the ones I mentioned. Well, let's have a talk about that. Let's look at the ones that are found with dinosaurs. So, Howard says what you are saying is false and has been completely falsified. Well, if this is a true, where we truly think that each other are making false statements, then let's just do a comparison of the data. In fact, I'm going to write it down right now that this is one of my projects is to look up the mammals that are with dinosaurs in the same record in the same layer as dinosaurs. Okay. So I'm writing that down and I will collect information on that. And in fact, if hopefully I will have time to do a good a look at that this week. If not, it may have to be 2 weeks from now. But I will plan on doing a study on that and then presenting it, Howard. So, and you can present your evidence as well. So, and Howard says there are modern plants, but not bears. Okay, well, you know, there are certain types of animals that we don't find together, but we really don't. I mean, if these animals are living in different environments, we wouldn't necessarily expect that we would see them all together if they were buried rapidly in a worldwide flood. All the claims, Howard says, all the claims about modern mammals with dinos have been debunked by Joel Duff. I'd be happy to listen to what Dr. Joel has to say on this. And my claim is false about naming, Howard says. Well, I mean, bring it. Show me your evidence. I'll bring mine. So maybe I need to write that down as a future thing to look up as well. So naming of fossils. Okay, now it may take me a little while to get to all these topics because I do have limited time. But Howard says, why is there no angiosperm pollens or fossils in the Paleozoic? We'll have to look into that because I'm actually, I don't know that that's true, but I will be happy to look into that. So Howard says, please provide a single example of an ungulate in dinosaur. I don't know. even what that means, to be honest. Um, but Top Dog says evolution in biology is the change in heritable characteristics of biological populations over successive generations, driven by processes such as natural selection and genetic drift. Okay, if that's the evidence, if that's the definition of evolution, then actually I believe in evolution because I believe that organisms do change. But what I don't believe is that organisms were evolved from a common ancestor by natural processes over millions of years and were able to acquire uh, all the thousands of genes and the diversity of life that we see on Earth today. That is what I believe is false. And that's what I believe there's no evidence for. Now, if we're just talking about changes in organisms through things like genetic drift, absolutely, genetic drift has in it's just a word describing what we see in a population that might be isolated. So we will see changes in, but within the genes that are already present. And Otangelo's joining me again. Hey, good to see you. You're a good partner on this.
Yes, hi, Rebecca. I was just removing the sound of the mainstream. So, how are you? Good night.
Great. Yeah, I'm having fun. How about you?
I'm too. Thanks. It's good to be on your stream.
Thank you. And actually, Howard, since Howard is watching, if he's still watching, I wanted to let you know that I printed out and started reading those articles you sent me on the heat problem. And honestly, they're pretty complicated, but it seems to me that those are based on the idea of the nuclear decay, the radioactive decay happening during the time of the flood. So I'm not sure that those apply to if the nuclear decay happened at creation. So, but I could be wrong about that. So correct me if I'm wrong. But I just wanted to mention that because he had sent me some stuff about the problem of heat with young Earth creation. So, do you have anything on your mind that you want to say about evolution right now, Otangelo?
Yes, evolution is the fairy tale of for adults. So, yeah, it is. It is compelling to those which have not studied the topic in depth, and you need very much a lot of time, a lot of reading, a lot of study. I've studied for decades now, and I think that even biologists, which are professionals in the field, in many cases do not have a really good understanding because it is a topic which entails very different things, and you need to have a holistic understanding of biology, and that takes a lot of time for someone really to get a grasp, even a superficial grasp of what it entails to construct organismal architecture and biocomplexity.
Hey, and that's why I'm glad you're here because you have a lot more information on that than I do. And now, Top Dog says, do you know about the phylogenetic challenge? You know what, Top Dog? Yes, I do because you told me about it. And this is basically a challenge to creationists to kind of say where the kinds started. And to be honest, I am not that interested in trying to figure that out. My main interest is, trying to help people understand that they've been indoctrinated to evolution, that this is a belief system and it's not based on scientific evidence as it's uh, uh, basically presented itself to be. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention to you, Top Dog, is thank you for the music. Top Dog has made like a bunch of music and he sent me a playlist. Thank you for that. And it's actually pretty good. Uh, but I haven't listened to the whole playlist yet. But the stuff I heard was good. So thank you for sharing that. And here's a challenge, or maybe a suggestion for a piece of evidence for evolution. It says, and I'm sorry, I don't know, Cobra SJ. In summary, all known Earth life shares a DNA RNA based system pointing to a common origin. Now, I mean, I'll give you a chance to respond to that too, Otangelo, but just having a common system does not suggest a common origin. It could be pointing toward a common origin. So I would call this neutral evidence, because this is like, basically it could go either way. So I'm not going to say this is evidence against evolution. I think it could be pointing toward evolution, but we would need more than that, because what we need to actually give positive evidence for evolution is something that would show that animals, organisms were able to develop by a natural process. So what do you say to that, Otangelo?
Well, I see a disconnection between the evidence and the inference. Why should the fact that all life forms require DNA and RNA point to universal common ancestor? In my understanding, it can inasmuch point to a common creator, which used the same building blocks and building tools to create all life forms and created at the beginning individually. So I don't think that the fact that all life forms share DNA and RNA can be used to infer universal common ancestry. To me, there is a disconnection between the evidence and the inference.
Yes, and I think there's also the problem with the way that, like, similarities are used to support evolution, is that what I've noticed is that when dissimilarities exist, those never get to be counted against evolution. So, for example, if we find something that's unique to an organism, or we find, for example, we find two organisms that are morphologically very similar, like, for example, a marsupial lion and a regular lion, or mountain lion or panther or lion. So we find these two cats that are morphologically similar, but they don't match up genetically, and they're not on the same tree. They're not on the same supposed branch. So to me, that should count against common ancestry. But the problem is that what evolution believers do is they just make up words instead of actually recognizing that this is a problem for their theory. They make up words to explain it, like convergent evolution. That is, the word convergent evolution is just a word made up to avoid addressing a problem with the theory, a major problem with the theory. So, yeah.
Well, may I add to that in fact, rather than immediately jump to the term convergent evolution, why don't we just first of all admit that there is convergence in biology and in life forms? Like, for example, the camera eye of humans is very similarly built up to the octopus eye, and we do not share as the same phylogenetic direction. So we are very distinct and far apart. And that shouldn't be the case, because evolution should always bring up different kinds of solutions and not convergent evolutions of very different life forms. So this is indeed evidence against evolution, But when we are talking about the dogma, and evolution is a dogma, then of course all kind of evidence can be explained away and then reinterpreted to mean always the same thing, that evolution is corroborated. Well, no, that's not the case. How do you explain that echolocation exists in bats and in dolphins? They are very distant one from the other. There are salamanders which have a catapult tongue which catches insects very fast, and we see that also in chameleons, and we see it also in other in snails which live in the ocean, and we see it in um, uh, not octopus, but other in the same line. So there are convergent solutions in 3, 4 different life forms, and they adopt the same solution. How do you explain that with evolution? I think it is evidence against evolution and not for evolution, but then people simply make up the term convergent evolution. Well, because evolution just did find out the same solution in different niches and in different environments and adapt. Well, that is a just so story. That's not evidence based.
Yes, and actually, I started making a list of all the convergent evolution, that has happened according to this model. And the one that gets me is silk production, because can you imagine this complex mechanism within an organism that is able to spin silk, and then a mechanism for delivery of silk for building structures, webs, and things like that. Now, if you look at what evolutionists say about it, they say silk has the ability to make silk has evolved separately 20 times. Now, I don't know about anybody else, but it already stretches the imagination to think that a mechanism to produce silk and then to deliver it in order for it to be useful to the organism, that's already an incredibly complicated mechanism. For that to evolve one time by natural processes would be astounding. But they say it happened separately 20 times because so many different types of organisms have the ability to make silk. So that doesn't really make sense if we're thinking about life evolving from a common ancestor and we're trying to make sense of a tree of life that branched out. It completely goes against what you would expect if you were looking for a common ancestry throughout. We're getting a lot of comments. So let's see. I have to see where I am on the comments right now. And so Morgan says, my evidence for evolution is ice nucleation of electromagnetism. I have no idea what this is talking about. I think he's making this up. But anyway, Morgan, give us more if that's a real thing. Howard says, if the Earth is young, why does the geologic record have thousands of deeply weathered soils and associated river valleys? Did they form in the middle of Noah's flood? Well, I don't know because I haven't looked at specifically all of those. And Howard is a geologist, so he probably knows better than I do what's out there in the geologic record. But actually, what is interesting to me that I think, and so I can't answer this right now. Okay, I haven't looked into that at all. And actually, I'll write that down as a thing to look into. But this actually is a young Earth. He's making a young Earth proposal here, and this is really about examining the evidence for evolution. So I would like to maybe I will put that one on hold for a little bit. But I also will mention that one thing that's really strange is that in like the geologic layers, if these are all layers that like really took millions of years to form, we should see erosion between the layers. But in many, many layers, some layers do have erosion, but in many, many layers, they are laid down right on top of each other with no evidence of erosion between them. So that doesn't really fit the model and the proposed timescale for evolution.
Okay, so I looked up the term which our friend put here in the chat, and he didn't make it up. It is indeed something real which exists. Brittle ice nucleation via electromagnetic induction, as phrased, is not a currently recognized or experimentally verified phenomenon in physics or marine science. However, let's break down the terms and explore whether there is any theoretical or conceptual overlap that might inspire such question. Then it goes on and talks about each of these terms. So in the end, there is no known mechanism by which electromagnetic induction directly causes or influences pre-nickel ice nucleation, but there is emerging theoretical interest in how electromagnetic fields might influence water structure or nucleation thresholds in general, not specific to brinicles. So I don't really know how this is related to evolution, but he is saying something that is real. He didn't make up the terms.
Okay, thank you. Well, anyone is welcome. If you want to come on and explain to us how that is the evidence for evolution, we welcome you. We welcome anyone who would like to present evidence for evolution. And we're just kind of going through the comments right now, unless somebody wants to join. And don't worry, me and Otangelo will be very nice to you, whoever you are. And so we're not here to try to make anyone look bad. We will just respectfully listen to your evidence. And then if you actually have good evidence, I will write it down and I'll look it up and it'll go on my list of good evidence for evolution. And I plan on, if there is good evidence for evolution, I'll show that every time I do a stream like this. And if people have brought me good evidence. So Skyworks says, who are these two trying to fool? Well, join and tell us your evidence. We are actually trying to expose people to the reality about something that's being taught, and people are being told over and over again that evolution is a fact. It's just so well supported scientifically. Most scientists believe in it. And so a lot of people who aren't interested in science, what can they do except just take people's word for it, take the authorities' word for it? And unfortunately, that is causing a lot of people to live in a false view of reality. Evolution is not true. It's not the true, or it's not our origin story. We were created by God. And yes, I have an agenda here. I want you to know God. I want you to know that you didn't come about by natural processes. And so that's what I'm here to show. But I do want to stick with the science. And if evolution is as scientific as it's promoted to be, then bring it. Let's see your scientific evidence.
So Howard is asking here, why is the order of pelycosaurs, then dinosaurs, then ungulated always in the same order worldwide, and they are never mixed? So I looked this up, and here is my answer. The claim that the fossil record always shows a strict non-overlapping sequence, pelycosaurs, dinosaurs, and ungulates never mixed, and that in a global order, is factually incorrect. This oversimplified evolutionary sequence does not hold universally, and numerous exceptions, overlaps, and co-occurrences in the fossil record have been documented. And then I have here a long list of refutations which I will not read, but I would strongly recommend that people actually, before they make such claims, study actually the topic.
Well, thanks for looking that up, Otangelo. Wow, I'm really glad to have a partner. I guess is ungulates, is it like the hooved animals? Is that what that is? I think it's
No
like
idea.
the deer and the cow and stuff like that. Okay, so Howard says, please show at least one exception not involving reverse faults. Okay, Howard, you know what? I would really like, you have a lot of comments, but it's very hard to actually have a conversation through the comments. So I hope you will come on. If not today, then maybe one day plan to come on and share your evidence. Lunatic 963 says, is there any good evidence for evolution? Well, we'll see. I haven't seen it so far, but I'm open to it and I will be honest about it. If I see something and if it is good evidence and I don't find a response to it that is good, then I will admit that there is good evidence for evolution. But right now, I don't think there is good evidence for evolution. And so that's why I'm doing this. I want people to know the truth.
Well, he wants to come on. Maybe you send him a link.
Oh, yes. The link is in the description. Oh, he said he's going to come on? Okay, awesome. Okay, so Top Dog says, your questions are most likely already answered. Why ask people that don't really know about the topic? Well, actually, I'm not asking questions right now. I've read a lot of books on evolution, and in fact, I got one right here. Why evolution is true. And let me tell you what this book is not going to tell you. It's not going to tell you why evolution is true. In fact, this is one of the most ridiculous propaganda books that I've ever read. So, but if there is, oh, good, Howard's coming on. It says his devices are not connected right now. So, Howard, you might need to check your microphone and your video because it's not letting it connect right now. So we'll give Howard a minute and let's see if there's any other comments. And I do like this comment from Top Dog. It's better to understand than to believe. It gives room to change. So yeah, I think it's good to understand, and I want to understand. So I'm here to understand. Help me understand why this is a good theory. And Morgan says, Rencycle ice nucleation
I just
electromagnetic.
commented on that.
Okay. Morgan, you're going to have to come on and talk to us about this. So, okay. Howard is asking in the private chat, what is he doing wrong? There we go. We got him now. Hey, Howard, how are you? You're on mute, so we can't hear you. There we go. You're still on mute. We can see your video, but we can't hear your voice.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Thanks for coming on.
You're very welcome. Can I mention something about the order of the fossil record?
Yeah.
So the order that I mentioned of land animals, pelycosaurs. I hear an echo. What am I doing wrong?
No, you're not echoing.
If you still have the video playing, you might need to shut off your YouTube, like turn off the YouTube video or mute it.
How about that?
Yeah,
I mean,
okay.
we weren't hearing your echo. Is that better? Okay.
All right.
By the way, let me introduce Howard, because Howard actually has a PhD in geology and has worked in geology. He worked for oil companies and he's written books on this topic. So he's a very good person to have on here. So thank you for coming on, Howard.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I worked for an oil company for 26 years. Now I do consulting for oil companies. And biostratigraphy today is by far used by oil companies more than any other group, and so they wouldn't be using it if it didn't work. And we know from many studies that it does work. So I mentioned about the land animals, pelycosaurs, then which are pelycosaurs are the reptiles that have the large fin back. They're not dinosaurs, but they're large reptiles that have the fin sticking up out of their back, and their legs are splayed to the side, unlike dinosaurs, which have the legs that are directly underneath, like an elephant. So it's pelycosaurs and their relatives, and then dinosaurs, and then ungulates. Ungulates, you're right, are hooved animals. The order of those animals is always the same. There are no exceptions, and they are never mixed. And that doesn't make sense because ungulates today live coast to coast and from, not in Antarctica, but basically, and not in Australia, but everywhere else. And so the fact that that order is inviolate, and I could list 100 different examples. I could list an example from corals. I could list an example from arthropods or anything. And all the examples that creationists have claimed where that order is not out of order are from reverse faults. They all have structural explanations. There are no examples where they're out of order and the stratigraphy is undisturbed by faults. So I think that is a very difficult thing to defend. Okay, I'll stop talking.
Yeah, so I challenge this claim. The fossil record is not globally synchronized in fine detail. Many taxonomic groups coexisted or overlapped in time, and sedimentary mixing, erosion, and tectonics routinely disturb sequences. And this is in fact true. There is no single continuous global rock column that contains every layer and every fossil group in perfect order from every geological age. Each geological formation is local or regional, not worldwide. And correlations between layers, like the Cambrian in North America versus China, rely on index fossils, radiometric dating, and biostratigraphy, not direct stacking. And this is directly from a science paper here. So I disagree with your claim.
Well, can I comment on that? So I didn't claim that there are no overlaps in fossil groups. I listed 3 specific fossil groups. There has never been an ungulate found mixed with dinosaur bones. Nowhere in the world. I mean, this would be huge news if it was true. Your statement that there's no place where you can see the complete fossil record, absolutely true. But there's also no place, I mean, this is kind of a trivial example. There's no place where you can see North America and China at the same time. But that isn't relevant. I mean, we know they both exist on the Earth. The fact is that when we do see the geologic column, it's always in the same order. There are no exceptions. Now, there are animals that lived in the past that are still alive today, like horseshoe crabs. But there are lots of animals that don't occur in certain layers and do occur in subsequent layers. And the order is all the same, always the same. And, biostratigraphy is used a lot in the oil industry, and it works very well. Mostly what we use are microfossils, not macrofossils. And so the order it worked out in so great detail. We don't even talk about the Cretaceous anymore. We talk about the individual little time slices within the Cretaceous. So, your statements about the order not being universal is absolutely false. Now, there are lots of local variations. For example, Tyrannosaurus rex only occurs in Western North America. It doesn't occur anywhere else. So you can't use it as an index fossil to correlate to China. But a lot of the different trilobite forms do occur worldwide, like agnathid trilobites occur worldwide and in the same order.
Okay, so I'll refute that again. No, that statement is not true. Neither scientifically accurate nor supported by the actual fossil record. So the claim that pelycosaurs and dinosaurs and ungulates always appear in the same order worldwide and they are never mixed. The reality, this claim is false on multiple levels, paleontologically, geologically, and historically. It is an oversimplification. The statement implies a neat linear sequence, pelycosaurs, dinosaurs, and ungulates, but the fossil record shows branching, overlapping, and coexisting lineages, not the staircase of successive replacement. So the correct framing would be Pelycosaurs dominated the early Permian, then therapsids, mammal-like reptiles, coexisted in the Triassic with early dinosaurs, and ungulate ancestors existed in the late Cretaceous alongside non-avian dinosaurs. And that is from Weibel 2007, Cretaceous Eurytherians, and so forth, of a scientific paper. So,
well,
yeah.
that's exaggerating what I said. I didn't say therapsids. I said pelycosaurs. There are no pelycosaurs overlapping with dinosaurs. And there may be ungulate ancestors in the Cretaceous, but there are no ungulates. There are no hoofed animals. So you're taking what I said, exaggerating it, and then showing that the exaggeration isn't true. So I'm not saying that there aren't animals that are mixed. I'm saying that is one example of a succession of animals that absolutely are never mixed. There is no exception of the order. They are never mixed and they are never out of order. Now, in any one place, you may not have all three of those successions because there's a lot of erosion. There's pieces of the stratigraphic record that are missing. Unlike what you said earlier, erosion of layers is extremely common. It's widespread, and it's just not so much in the Grand Canyon, but outside the Grand Canyon, it's extremely common and extremely important for petroleum exploration.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that, Howard, because this is very interesting. I would like to understand more about what are you actually looking at when you are looking at biostratigraphy with regard to oil. Can you tell us a little bit about that process?
What's the exact question? Sorry.
What you said you said we use biostratigraphy when we're looking for oil. Is that what
Yes.
you? Okay. So what is it? What are you looking for? Can you explain to us the process that you're using?
Sure. There's several different reasons that we might use it, and it gets complicated, but I'll just show you. I'll just do, I think, two examples of how we use it. One is if you're building a paleogeographic map and trying to determine where the fairways are for sand, and sandstone is a very common type of petroleum reservoir. If you have two wells and you don't know you can't correlate them any other way, you'll use biostratigraphy. And that way, if you find sand in one well and you find shale in another well and you know it's the same age, you might look at someplace else to find the sand. Another way we would use it is to try to figure out there are rivers that enter the ocean at different times, and some rivers contain high quality sand and some rivers contain low quality sand. So if you know the age, that could give you a clue as to the which river was active at that one time, because this has changed as mountains are built and eroded flat, and then new mountains are built. They source different kinds of sand that could go into the basin. And then a third reason is burial rates. So if we know the timing using biostratigraphy, we can get at the burial rate, and this has implications for the temperature of the rocks, how the basin developed, and for the pressure of the overlying shales. And so this gets into the technical aspects of how expensive it is to drill a well. And that's just a few very high level reasons why we might use biostratigraphy. But correlation is the big one. Trying to get the things correlated correctly so we can build paleogeographic maps and look for where are the conditions right to form reservoirs.
So, Howard, can I make some short sentences, and then if you disagree, you tell me why? Okay?
Wait, hold on, wait, Tangelo, is it on this topic? Because I want to ask a little more about this topic.
Yeah, it would be about how oil deposits point to.
Okay, go for it, and then I'll come back to my question. Go for it. Thanks.
So massive oil fields require enormous amounts of organic material buried rapidly, consistent with the global catastrophe. Marine fossils found in oil-bearing layers suggest widespread southern oceanic burial, not slow accumulation. Some oil is found in geologically young rocks, where traditional models say there hasn't been enough time to form hydrocarbons. Lab experiments show.
Oh, wait. Can I comment on what you've said so far
Sure.
before you go to the lab experiments? Because that's really a different topic. So first of all, rapid burial. No, rapid burial doesn't work because when you bury organic material rapidly, it dilutes it. And so you don't end up with concentrated organic matter that you need to form significant amounts of oil. This has been studied at length. And so it's a delicate balance to try to get what are called source rocks, which are the origin of almost all oil, not all, but most oil. Is that in order to get a high concentration of organic matter, like in oil shales, if the deposition rate's too fast, it gets diluted. If it's too slow, the organic matter degrades. So it's, I forget what the exact numbers are, but typically it's centimeters, maybe a centimeter in 1,000 years, something like that. If you bury it rapidly, it doesn't work. It won't produce oil because it'll be too dilute. And so this idea that you need rapid burial to form oil is false. It's been falsified by thousands of published papers. And this is something that, of course, has huge economic implications. There are, when you look at the fossils, with one exception, source rocks contain no well-preserved fossils. They're always scattered fish remains consistent with slow burial. And so the rapid burial doesn't work for oil accumulation. The comment you made about young oil, I don't know that specific example, but oil is almost never found where it accumulated. It accumulates in oil-rich shales. Then through compaction and heating, the oil is cooked and then migrates into much younger sediments. So where the oil is found in young sediments is not where it originated from.
Yeah, I would have a lot to respond to that, but I'll give it to you, Rebecca.
Okay, thank you. Well, Howard, I was just wondering for you, and when I hear you say all these things about, we look for this fossil here and this fossil here to see, like, you're looking at like features that maybe I would agree with also. And so we have like a difference of time scale, but how do these different layers to you, how does this point toward evolution? Like, what about this tells you that life evolved from a common ancestor?
Well, that's a different, of course, biostratigraphy does not depend on evolution. Biostratigraphy was discovered by somebody who didn't accept evolution. And so all the biostratigraphy is showing you is that the order that the fossils occur in is the same. Now, there are always some local differences, but there are many successions that are the same. For example, one of the most commonly used fossils for biostratigraphy is something you've probably never heard of called a coccolith. And that's a single-celled algae that has a calcite shell, so it gets preserved. And when you drill an oil well, what you get up are cuttings. They're little pieces of rock about this big, about half a centimeter, quarter inch or so. And so those can be disaggregated to find the coccoliths. And the coccolith species are in the same order, like in the Gulf of Mexico. They're in the same order in wells that are hundreds of kilometers apart. And you can even go to Angola and find the same order of the coccolith fossils. And so size sorting doesn't work. They're not sorted by size, so it's not sedimentologic. And so what other process is there? The standard explanation for geologists in the petroleum business is that through evolution, you had one coccolith species spreading throughout the Atlantic, and then it's replaced by another coccolith species that then spreads through the Atlantic. I think with a short time frame, you can't get it to work. There's nothing you can do to get that order to be the same, and it is the same. And so, we spend, just to give you an example of the kind of money that we're talking about here, to run the biostratigraphy for an exploration well, you're probably talking about, like $50,000 to $100,000. And it's done for most exploration wells, probably not all, but most worldwide. And so there are biostratigraphy companies that do nothing but cater to the oil companies. And I think most creationists don't realize the economic utility of this. It's used widely in, per year. It's probably millions of dollars that are spent per year doing biostrat studies on individual wells. So I think if biostratigraphy works the way we know it works and the orders are inviolate, it's pretty hard to get that to be true with a young Earth. If all the stuff was deposited in 1 year, how do you get the succession of species to be consistent? Not worldwide for a lot of it, but basin wide. Hundreds of miles apart, even thousands of miles apart.
But Howard, let me ask you, why would it have to be during Noah's flood? Why couldn't have it occur during, let's say, 6,000-7,000 years?
Well, it depends on where you think the top and bottom of the flood sediments are. So in the Gulf of Mexico, there's a maximum of about 20 kilometers of sedimentary strata. And you tell me, where do you want to put the top and base of the flood? If you put the top of if you say that an oil well that's drilled down 3 miles through 3 miles of sedimentary strata, that's all post flood, then you've got 4,600 years to deal with. I don't think that's enough time, but it's a little bit more than 1 year. But you have to tell me where you're going to put the top of the flood sediments. And then I'll tell you whether the well is in Noah's flood or later. And, creationists cannot agree on where the top of the flood is. So there's some creationists that think it's the top of the geologic column. Others, there's a guy in California, I can't remember the name, of vertebrate paleontologist, who thinks it's the top of the Cretaceous. There are also disagreements of where the bottom of the flood sediments are. The reality is that when you look at the sedimentology, there is no indicator you can find that will be unique to what you call the flood sediments. There's no change in sedimentology from what is pre-flood, flood, and post-flood. It's all continuous. There's nothing you can point to that will be unique to the flood.
Okay, Howard, you know that I'm a young Earth creationist, and I know you don't agree with that time scale. But what I'm trying to really get to here is what is the actual evidence that evolution happened? And so for you, is there something about these layers that tell you, you mentioned different species of algae, but we have different species of algae alive today in different areas, right? So that doesn't tell me how, organisms developed by any mechanism to produce life on Earth today.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. So there's two different lines of argument. One is for an old Earth that is independent of evolution, because the Earth could be young or old, independent of evolution. If the Earth is ancient, that doesn't mean evolution happened. And then the other is the direct evidence for evolution. So first, about the age, I'm primarily a stratigrapher and sedimentologist, and so your comments about erosion between layers just really bugs me, because I spent much of my career documenting those erosional services, and in fact, they're critical for a whole school of stratigraphy called sequence stratigraphy, which was developed at Exxon and I became expert at. And so, a lot of the comments about stratigraphy, like what you just said, Otangelo, about rapid burial and slow burial, just are not true. There's lots of evidence that they're not true. So that's the age issue, and soils in the past and all that. In terms of evolution, what we see is a progression worldwide that is the same. All the comments that creationists have been made about modern animals, I shouldn't say all, that's not true. Many of the comments about modern animals say mixed with dinosaurs, are just not true. There's no beavers, there's no, what's the other one? I forget, but Joel Duff has done a whole series of videos on debunking this. Somebody published a paper saying that there was a mammal in the Cretaceous, and they said it was the beaver of the Cretaceous, but that was a poetic turn of phrase. It wasn't meant to be taken literally from the paper. It's not even a placental mammal. I mean, it's just not a placental mammal. And this idea that you're saying about people naming things differently just to make things different, that's just, it's not that they're different species, it's they're not even the same group of mammals. They're just, wildly different groups. So you've got a progression of animals. Let's take birds for example. The earliest birds worldwide are the things like Archaeopteryx, which has many characteristics shared with dinosaurs and not shared with modern birds. This includes a long bony tail, claws on all the digits, no beak, and instead it has a snout with small, sharp teeth, and some other characteristics. And the old idea was that Archaeopteryx, when it was discovered in the 1800s, was a direct ancestor of modern birds. Nobody thinks that anymore. It's that the idea is that it represents a side branch of birds. And if you look at the birds through the Mesozoic, the proportion of beaked birds gradually increases, and the proportion of toothed birds gradually decreases until you get after the Paleozoic or after the Mesozoic, and they're all beaked birds. And so what we see, we don't see direct ancestor descendant relationships, but what we see is the oldest birds all share a lot of characteristics of theropod dinosaurs, and that modern birds do not. And so there's a succession, but you don't find any modern birds in the Mesozoic, for example, despite creationist claims to the contrary. And you could repeat that example in many different groups, that you've got a succession, and the early examples of that succession look very much like the groups from which they evolved, allegedly. And the later you get increasing morphologic distance through time. And so the claims of creationists that all this stuff is just mixed together just aren't true. Now, clearly there are some modern organisms in the ancient, in the dinosaurs. I saw one creationist video where they said, well, nobody talks about dinosaurs walking around conifer forests. Well, that's not true. All geologists know there were conifer forests in the Cretaceous. And so there are some modern organisms that occur with those ancient organisms, and others that don't. So I think, did that answer your question? I don't want to get off topic, and I don't want to be too.
It's starting to answer why you in Archaeopteryx, you're seeing a progression from dinosaur to bird. Is that what you're saying? Mm-hmm. So what's interesting though is, it's a little strange, isn't it, that like in the fossil record, we have like complete organisms that, and many of whom there is no anything that could be like called a transition. For example, fish, we have nothing leading up to a fish. We have other organisms, but we have a million, at least more than a million fossil fish. And yet there's not any transitional up to a fish. Same thing with dinosaurs. We've got thousands of dinosaurs, right? Why don't we know what happened? Where's the progression to a dinosaur?
And I would like to add to that.
Yeah, sure.
Eugene Koonin, he wrote a paper, The Biological Big Bang Model for the Major Transitions in Evolution. And he says, major transitions in biological evolution show the same pattern of sudden emergence of diverse forms at a new level of complexity. The relationships between major groups within an emergent new class of biological entities are hard to decipher and do not seem to fit the tree pattern that, following Darwin's original proposal, Eugene Koonin. And he continues, remains the dominant description of biological evolution. The cases in point include the origin of complex RNA molecules and protein folds, major groups in viruses, archaea and bacteria, and the principal lineages within each of these prokaryotic domains, eukaryotic supergroups, and animal phyla. In each of these pivotal nexuses in life's history, the principal types seem to appear rapidly, and fully equipped with the signature features of the respective new level of biological organization. No intermediate grades or intermediate forms between different types are detectable. Usually, this pattern is attributed to cladogenesis compressed in time, combined with the inevitable erosion of the phylogenetic signal. So this is not a creationist who wrote this, but one of the most recognized biological theorists. And he is not the only one, especially in regards of the Cambrian explosion. There are more than 20 phyla which suddenly appear uh, uh, in the fossil record. So there is no gradual evolution here.
Well, that's partly true and partly not true. There are certainly animals that occur before the Cambrian. There's the Ediacara fauna, and some of those might be related to mollusks and echinoderms and a few other things. So there is, it is spotty, but it's a worldwide fauna. So there's clearly some ancestry there. But working in many cases, the the transition between phyla is not well documented. In fact, that's kind of why we call them a phyla. Is by definition, we don't see their ancestry. But if you look at fossil fish, I don't know about the origin of dinosaurs. I'm not a vertebrate paleontologist, but I do know a little bit about fish. So the earliest fish, you'd hardly even recognize them as fish. They don't have jaws. They don't have skeletons. The earliest fish are very, very weird. They're agnathans. We only have a couple agnathans living today: the hagfish and the lamprey. And then through time, you see the gradual development of jaws, and then you see the diversification of fish into the modern groups. So, like teleost fish don't occur until much, much later, which are the major kinds of fish today. Some of the other fish appeared earlier. I don't know off the top of my head exactly when all the groups occurred. But there is a gradual progression of fish through time, starting with these very simple, very weird looking fish that don't even have skeletons, bones, or jaws. And so there is a progression there. And it's not like bass or sharks suddenly appeared in the Cambrian. It's very early, very primitive fish that started first, and then you gradually through time got more complex. But there's no question the organism is complex. The very first fossils we have are complex, and we don't see the transition we don't see the transition to multicellular animals. But there are lots of transitions that are preserved. Like the transition from reptiles to mammals is very well preserved. A lot of the transitions within mammals are well preserved, and so some transitions are not, but some transitions are.
Well, I don't really see the transitions. I think the transitions comes from the thinking of life in terms of common ancestry. So you think of life that way, and then make a tree in your mind, or you see a tree of life that somebody has created. But for you, what do you see as the mechanism by which organisms could have made that transition?
Oh, natural selection.
Since natural selection can only select from what's already present, how do organisms get that genetic information?
Well, you said that mutations always degrade. I don't know that that's true or not. There's no theoretical reason why, if you have enough mutations, some of them can't be beneficial and create new structures.
Yeah, Howard, have you studied microbiology on a biochemical level?
No,
Yeah.
I'm. That's why I'm a little hesitant to talk about this. I have vast knowledge of sedimentary geology and stratigraphy, so that's why I know that what you said about oil generation absolutely is not true. You
Yeah,
cannot have oil generation.
I didn't respond to that because it would take a lot of time. But I have material with which is not in agreement with what
Well,
you
I've
said.
got 26 years experience working for a big oil company, so I think I know more about this than you, quite frankly. I mean, you might know more about genetics or something than me, but when it comes to oil generation. There's two problems with generating oil from in a creationist model. One is trying to get the high organic content source rock. How do you do that? And the other is, how do you heat it? Because once you bury it, if you buried it with Noah's flood, you somehow have to generate enough heat to get oil. Typically, you need to get somewhere around 200 degrees C. And so, where does that heat come from? And the creationists have never come up with an adequate explanation of that. Because if it was just buried during Noah's flood, that it's only 4,000 years ago, that's not enough time to heat from below. So the heat is a major problem. And the source, how do you concentrate algae? We know that some oil comes from plants, but the vast majority of oil comes from algae. And how do you concentrate the algae? Rapid deposition tends to do the opposite. It tends to dilute the algae.
So would you not agree that during a global flood, massive tectonic shifts would generate actually immense frictional and geothermal heat?
Even if you generated the heat, how do you get it into the sediments? Because heat doesn't move conductively very fast. And so, say in typical basins, you have something like 10 to 15 kilometers of sediment. And so even if the ocean crust was hot at the time it formed, bury it through several kilometers of shale, and then you have to get that heat to propagate up. You can't get it to work. The rate at which heat propagates is well known. We know the heat. Almost every time they drill an exploration well, they measure the temperature at the bottom of the well. So we've got a ton of temperature data from all the oil basins in the world, and we know that the as you go down, of course, things get hotter. Everybody knows this, but the rate at which they get hotter is well known, and it is inconsistent with a young Earth and perfectly consistent with an ancient Earth. And so the heat data is a major problem for creationists. You cannot deposit and get those sediments hot enough to generate the kind of temperatures you need for oil generation.
So would you disagree with these 2 points, subduction zones and rapid plate movement? Like catastrophic plate tectonics would cause localized heating, and crustal thinning, rifting, and magma intrusion would elevate geothermal gradients. Would you disagree with that?
That's getting into an area of geology I don't know a lot about. So, if you have to create the Atlantic Ocean in 4,000 years ago, there's a lot of evidence that doesn't work. The ocean crust today is way too cold, and there's no mechanism to cool it down. I know creationists have talked about mechanisms to cool it down, but none of them work, and they don't work where there's a blanket of sediments on top of it. There's actually really interesting work that's just coming out right now, that the early Atlantic basin, when the continents were just barely splitting apart, that early basin was dry, that there was no ocean in there. And there's evidence of subaerial deposition and actually freshwater lakes. And some of the freshwater lakes generated source rocks that are today the source of oil. And we can actually type the geochemistry of freshwater algae oil versus saltwater algae oil are different. You can actually geochemically distinguish them. And so, how in a creationist model do you have time for freshwater lakes to develop in the early Atlantic basin and then produce enough organic material to produce oil?
Well, do you think it makes a difference that we're not starting from having to get everything by natural processes? Meaning, we believe God created, and he created things that were already mature. So, I mean, we don't need it to develop by natural processes. Does that help?
No, because as soon as you say there was a miracle, then you stop doing science. Because anytime you get to a problem that you can't solve, you just say, well, it was a miracle. And then you get to the next problem, you can't, oh, it was a miracle. And that's called God of the gaps. And the problem with that is as soon as you come up with an explanation, you've got two explanations for the origin of these freshwater deposits, one that requires a miracle and one that doesn't. Why go with the miracle?
So
It's
Howard, are you
the
an
only
atheist?
reason for going with the miracle is you want to keep the earth young. But you can, if you just let the earth be old, then all the pieces fit together.
So Howard, are you an atheist?
No.
Wait, let's not go into that, Otangelo, because I want to keep it on the science here. And
I think we can just look at the evidence and try to explain the evidence. And when you say, you're really cherry picking the results when you say that there's modern animals with ancient animals. Yes, there are some, but there's a lot of places where there aren't. And the order of the fossil record is more or less the same worldwide. And, to claim that it's not is not true. There's no place where you can go, for example, where you can see, ungulates and pelycosaurs together. It doesn't happen, even though they're both terrestrial. We've got lots of evidence they're living in the same environments. And, it's really tough to explain all the erosion that you say doesn't exist when it does, or the soils. I mean, I'm going back to my area of expertise because I just feel more comfortable with it. Even though I do have a PhD in paleontology, I haven't really done paleontology in a long time.
oh, wow. Okay, that's good to know. Good.
I actually studied, my PhD was actually on taphonomy, which is the study of preservation, how fossils get preserved. So I've got a lot of expertise in taphonomy, but as my career progressed, sometimes careers take paths that you don't expect, and I ended up being a petroleum geologist, which I've done for the last 30 years or so. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, I'm comfortable sticking with your area of expertise because if we have somebody here who has expertise, I would love to learn more. Somebody in the comments said, Pierre says, could you please point me to the literature that explains the up-to-date model of how strata form in terms of sedimentation and erosion? I think this might be time for Howard to plug his book.
Yes, that's the best. That's the best one. So
say the name of it because
it's called the Handbook of Siliciclastic Facies. So it doesn't deal with limestone; it deals with sandstone, shale, and conglomerate. And then we've got a book coming out in about 2 weeks on stratigraphy, and so that's not quite ready yet, but hopefully that'll be out soon.
So I'm really curious. I would like to know, Howard, if you believe that, for example, collagen can remain preserved for 65 million years if its half-life is 130,000 years.
Well, I think there's, I'm not claiming that we know everything there is to know about geology and stratigraphy. So collagen, the discovery of collagen in bones was a shocker. I mean, that's just an amazing thing. There are some, they're beginning to develop some ideas on how that could have happened. So you have to realize that a lot of collagen is encased in silica. And once it gets encased in hard silica crystals, it's not clear if that might stop the decay. There's also some discussion about iron stopping the decay. But I'd say, you guys have collagen, and I've got 20 other things that show that the earth is ancient. And so, there's one thing, I don't think you can say that it's been proven that collagen can't last that long, although it was a shocking surprise. I'm not going to, say that it wasn't a surprise. But I think, one of the ways to look at this is, the claim that collagen was occurring in fossils was eventually accepted because you could point to it, and other people could, Mary Schweitzer could go to the rocks and say, collect dinosaur bones at this location and do this, and you'll find the collagen. And people did it and they found it. And so you couldn't deny it. And, look at that as opposed to, say, claims that dinosaurs and humans live together. that has not been accepted because there's no place you can go to look at that evidence. There's no evidence to be found.
No,
There's
the
some
question
ancient
is not
carvings or
about.
something.
Yeah, that's not the question. The question is if indeed collagen could be
Well,
remain preserved 65 million years, especially if we know that bacteria, they also operate even if the bone is closed.
Well, there's certain environments where bacteria don't operate, and you have to test it for anoxic settings, which certainly slow decay, if not stop it. And then there are other chemical ways to fix the collagen in environments that don't have bacteria. So, I don't have the answers. I am not a geochemist. I'm not a biochemist. And so I'm a little hesitant. My hesitancy is just that I lack expertise. This is what I'll say. Every time I've seen a young earth argument in an area where I have expertise, it's been a lie. Every single time. This is an area where I don't have expertise. I don't know the latest theories. And so I'm a little hesitant to talk about it because of my lack of expertise, not because of any other reason.
Okay, well, and I wanted to ask about the oil, looking for oil. Is any of that based on hard dating methods? Like, are you using any radioisotope dating or anything like that? Or are you just going in what you expect to find in fossil layers and layers of sediment?
Sometimes one, sometimes the other. It just depends on the specific application. So, for example, if you're trying to work out basin history, you need the radiometric dates. It's not that we go out and collect radiometric dates. It's we use the biostratigraphy to tell us the relative age, and then we look up in a chart what the absolute age is. I mean, we don't. In my career, I've never once actually run a radiometric date. There are people that were using radiometric dates in the lab I was in, and that was more. I don't want to get into that because it's a side topic, but so for example, when here's another thing that creationists don't like to talk about or don't even know about is that when you load sediments on the crust, it's like people getting into a rowboat. The boat goes down a little bit. And the same thing happens with the crust. The crust goes down as you load sediments onto it. And so the rate at which that happens is critically important, both for the history of the basin and figuring out where the oil is going to migrate to, but also the heating of the sediments to generate oil. And that takes millions of years. You can't do it any faster. The rate of subsidence today that you observe is maybe maximum about 2 centimeters a year. And so, for example, when the glaciers melted in northern Canada, there was over a mile of ice, and that it melted very quickly, and that Canada is still coming up at about 2 centimeters a year. The same thing in the Gulf of Mexico. So we've got about 20 kilometers of maximum 20 kilometers of sediment, but it's at isostatic equilibrium. You can't do that in 4,000 years. You can't. There's no way to get the crust to subside, by tens of kilometers in 4,000 years. It essentially has to subside by 20 kilometers. Well, maybe not 20, maybe 18.
I mean, I at least do not claim 4,000 years. I claim 7,000. I know 5,700 years. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if 1,000 or 1,500 years difference makes a difference or not. Yeah, but anyway,
just multiply it out. You've got 2 centimeters in 2 centimeters a year into 20 kilometers. It's I'd have to do the math, but it's going to be millions or hundreds of millions of years to get that to work. And so isostatic subsidence rates are critically important. And we also look at the rates of burial using the millions of years scale, of course, because the more rapid that the burial is, the mud or shale, that's the most common sedimentary rock is shale by large amounts. It doesn't get compacted enough, and so that makes it gets technical, but that makes drilling very expensive.
Yeah.
And so there's lots of reasons why we need the millions of years and why it's a critical part of oil exploration. But sometimes we can geophysically detect the oil, and then you just don't care what the age is. You're just going to drill it. So it just depends on the application.
Yeah, Howard, thank you very much. I have to leave. Thank you, Rebecca, for um, being able to participate. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Tangela. Okay, see ya. Bye-bye.
Oh, I need to leave too because I need to make dinner.
Oh, okay. Well, then
I'll
we'll
let
have to
you
do
ask
that
one more
next
question.
time.
Ask one more
Okay.
question, then I'll answer it.
Okay, wait, I had a question. Well, I wanted to ask you what you thought about continents, like the fossil layers that go across continents. So, like we
Yes.
find the same layer, same sediment deposit on the opposite continent, even though these are supposed to have slowly, taken place. So, like, how did those sediment layers that stretch across continents get there?
There's a couple of different ways. One is that when the continents were joined, it was just one landmass, and so you can have the same sediment layer, no problem. The other explanation is that there are periods of time when sea level was high, and so you get marine deposits everywhere, and then periods of time when marine sea level was low, and so then you get erosion everywhere. And so there's global processes that can do that. But so it's two things: either the continents were together or based on global sea level history.
Okay, well, I would love to ask you more questions, but I'll let you go have your dinner and maybe we can do it another time. Thank you so much for coming on.
All righty. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. Okay, if anybody else wants to join, it's open. Oh, you can just come on and bring your evidence for evolution. And I will say, I've been very interested to talk to Howard. I've spoken with him privately before, and I do look forward to asking him more questions about geology. But, one thing that he pointed out, well, as I was asking him for evidence that things actually evolved from a common ancestor, he only brought up one transitional form. Now, he suggested that there were some other simple fish leading up to fish, but that is actually an assumption that they came from those as a common ancestor, from them in their ancestry. But actually, we have millions of fish. And what's really interesting is that we can't show any process. Evolution is supposed to be taking place over millions of years, small little changes leading up to these forms. And that is something that's completely missing with fish and with many other forms. I also mentioned dinosaurs. We've got thousands of dinosaurs, but where's the progression? Why don't we have any? If we have thousands of dinosaurs, you'd think we'd at least have one or maybe many more that were part of the transition to dinosaurs. In the same way, I think the example was given of bats. I think we've found like 1,000 fossil bats. Why don't we have any transitional forms? Why don't we have any step-by-step leading up to a bat? Why do we just, every bat we find is fully formed, fully, able to fly with a very unique feature, a mammal with this membrane for perfectly structured for flying. So why do we find so many fossil bats and no predecessors to a bat? So this is the problem with the fossil record, that we have the sudden appearance of forms, and we don't, by and large, have any forms that could be called transitional. We have a few. We have a few that are pointed to as possible transitional forms. But what's interesting is, as time goes on, even some of these forms like Tiktaalik, which was a lobe-fin fish that was maybe supposed to be leading up to animals on going on land. Now they've kind of been said, well, no, it wasn't in the exact lineage, and so it's hard to trace and find forms that are part of a step-by-step process of evolution over millions of years. Again, there are some that are said to be transitional forms, but what's interesting is that if this if these transitions have been happening for all organisms, you would expect that we would find more transitional forms than actually the forms that we see on Earth today, or fully complete organisms in their particular family of organisms. So the fossil record really, to me, does not reflect evolution, but it is interesting what Howard said about certain things being found in certain layers. And but what's interesting is he did pick a particular type of dinosaur, or I forget what he called it, pelycosaurs, and say those weren't found with the ungulates, but there are dinosaurs found with the ungulates. So you know, the fossil record doesn't have everything, but to me, if evolution is true, we should see a lot more forms that are in transition rather than the fully formed organisms that we see today. Another one that we don't see is we don't see the transition to limbs, the basic four-legged body plan that we see in many animals today. There's no transition to that. So we basically just see fully formed limbs in the fossil record. Now, that doesn't seem like the type of thing that could appear suddenly without, basically millions of years of process of slowly transitioning. So it would be expected that we would see more of a transition there than just going from lobed fin fish to fully formed digits and arms. All right, so thank you everybody for watching. I saw some new people here. So thank you, Final Experiment, and thank you, Lunatic963. Glad you guys are here. Iron Charioteer, awesome to have you back. Thank you for being here. And so appreciate you guys. And Morgan says it probably took less time. It probably took less time than we thought. Well, that's the problem. Actually, it needs more time. We keep finding reasons to push back the date for the development of life. And we regularly move things around by millions of years. I just saw an article this week that was moving an animal in like maybe 40 million years difference. So we just move around the millions like it's just nothing. So anyway, thanks everybody for watching. Appreciate you guys joining today. And if you have evidence for evolution, then be ready next week. I plan to do this weekly. I may not be able to do it every week, but I will be trying to do this weekly. If you have evidence for evolution, please bring it and we'll talk about it. And I will be honest about your evidence. And Howard gave me some things that I need to look up. And so I will get back to you guys on that, and take care. Have a good day.